A courtroom has been set up to judge the fate of a man. You, our audience, are the jury, and at the end of this trial, we'd like you to cast your verdict, as it will be your choices that will determine the final outcome of this trial. We give you The Trial of Philip Merryfield by Peter Cameron-Burnett.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for Her Honour Judge Wendy Grossman.
Please be seated. Clerk of the Court, please read the list of charges.
So please it, Your Honour, the case before the court is the Colony versus Philip Merryfield. Philip David Merryfield, you are charged that on the 15th of January of last year, you did wilfully remove one Mrs. Betty Adams from the rocket ship Bellerophon, the evacuation of the Earth then being underway. You did then wilfully leave and abandon her on the surface of a doomed world, and did subsequently falsify documents suggesting that you belonged on board. The charges are therefore murder de facto and fraud de jure. You will be tried by a panel of your fellow colonists and sentenced accordingly. I would also remind you that the colony is in a state of emergency and that martial law is in effect. Therefore, the maximum sentence this court can pass will include capital punishment. These are the charges, Your Honour.
Very well. Court is now in session. Prisoner escort. Dismissed.
Court counsels, fall in.
Counsel for the prosecution, please make your opening address.
So please it, Your Honour, our roles have yet to be assigned.
You don't know yet whether you're prosecuting or defending?
No, Your Honour. The court was convened so quickly.
Fine. You. Call.
Heads?
Heads it is. You're defending. Do I need to go
Right.
back?
That makes me prosecuting counsel, and as such, can I beg the court's indulgence for a few moments to prepare a case?
Very well. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the charges against the defendant. While the motivations will be discussed, the facts of the case are plain and are not in dispute. They have been verified by closed-circuit pictures of the launch. The gentleman before you bodily manhandled a widow off the ship and shut the hatch behind her, locking her out. We are all painfully aware that no signals have been received since the final cataclysm 2 days prior to our departure. Therefore, it is assumed that Mrs. Adams perished along with the rest, her rightful place having been usurped by the defendant. The lesser charge of manslaughter is not eligible in this case, as the actions of the defendant were quite deliberate. Under martial law, a conviction of murder carries a mandatory death penalty. The method of execution will be the last walk, where the convicted man will be given a spacesuit with 2 hours of air in which to make peace with his maker, and then evicted from the colony. Counsel for the prosecution, are you ready to make your opening remarks?
I am, Your Honour.
Please do so.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is very simple. A woman was chosen from amongst all the peoples of the earth to help build a new home for mankind here on Mars. The defendant turfed her out to save his own skin and then lied to cover up the fact. This is what happened. Our colony can hold no place for those unwilling to put the survival of all ahead of self-interest. Equally, we are incapable of sustaining extra mouths in the form of prisoners. The defendant must be sentenced accordingly, as an example to all.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you're up.
Your Honour, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Firstly, welcome to Mars. It's a bit of a rough planet, to be honest. If it wasn't for the cataclysm, there is no way we would choose to be here. To survive, we must re-examine our views. We are like the child who, on the death of the parent, realizes that they must mature quickly and become the head of the household. And this means looking at events with a wiser mind rather than acting automatically. We will call the selection process into question, and also raise a point that the prosecution has conveniently overlooked, namely the part played by the defendant in saving the colony 3 weeks ago.
Very well. Counsel for the prosecution, please call your first witness.
So please it, Your Honour, we will do. We would also beg the court's indulgence regarding the circumstances surrounding witnesses. The majority of people we would wish to call upon no longer exist, so we will have to make do. In order to establish the character of Mrs. Adams, we wish to call Cat Lamin.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Very well. Now, I would like to ask you...
Objection, Your Honour. The witness has merely nodded and not replied, and is not yet under oath.
Precedent, Your Honour. Collins versus the Borough of Hounslow. A nod is as good as a wink to a blind man, which states all forms of non-verbal communication are of equal rank in cases of disability. The Ability Equality Act, in turn, means non-verbal communication is acceptable to all.
Objection overruled. We recognize a nod as being a sign of comprehension and agreement. Proceed.
Thank you. Now, please take a look at the woman in this photograph. Do you recognise her?
Yes, that is Betty Adams.
What can you tell the court about her?
She was a lovely old lady.
Yes. Go on.
She had lovely grey hair and a warm smile and a cat. She loved that cat.
I understand that this is hard for you. Please, take your time.
She also had a blue cardigan?
Objection, Your Honour. The witness is clearly basing their entire opinion of Mrs. Adams on one photo. Can I ask if the witness ever met Mrs. Adams?
Your Honour, as per our previous tender to the bench, no character witness who actually knew Mrs. Adams is still extant. So we are doing the best we can in the circumstances.
Your Honour, we respectfully submit that a character witness who didn't know Mrs. Adams is completely worthless.
Your Honour, we respectfully submit that the fact that the character witness didn't actually know Mrs. Adams means that their testimony is completely unbiased, and it's actually more reliable than that of somebody whose answers might be clouded by emotion.
Objection overruled. You will get your chance to examine the witness. In the meantime, please allow your counterpart to do her job.
Your Honour, could someone pass me a crayon and a piece of paper, please? Thank you.
Would you consider this the sort of woman who should be hurled from a rocket ship and allowed to perish in an all-consuming cataclysm?
No, I would not.
I'd imagine you'd be pretty annoyed at someone who'd do that to someone like her.
Yes, I would.
No further questions, Your Honour.
Ms. Lamon, you've seen one side of Mrs. Adams. Perhaps you'd care to see another. Have a look at this. Would you care to tell the court what Mrs. Adams is doing in that artist's representation?
She's...
I understand this is difficult for you. Please take your time.
She appears to be eating babies.
And what is she eating babies with?
It looks like a spork.
Let the record show that the witness identified the utensil being used. Do you have children at all?
Yes, I do.
And do you love your children?
Objection, Your Honour. The witness's feelings for her children are not on trial here.
No, but my client is. And would it distress you greatly to find that they'd been eaten?
Of course it would.
So someone who would protect your offspring from being cannibalized by a demented old harridan, bearing the hellish love child of a spoon and a fork, I suppose that's someone to whom you would owe a debt of gratitude, would you not?
Yes.
Point of order, Your Honour. It has not been established that Mrs. Adams was a cannibal.
Your Honour, the witness is, at my learned colleague's bizarre insistence, someone who represents Mrs. Adams' character. If such an act as eating babies was so far outside her compass, the witness would hardly be as shaken as she clearly is now.
The witness is excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Paul Huggins.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, you are the personnel officer for the colony, are you not?
I am.
And it was you who noticed the discrepancy in the records, which led you to realise that the defendant was not the person who was supposed to be on board.
It was.
Can you tell the court what it was that aroused your suspicions?
It was his weight.
Could you elaborate?
The defendant had altered the file to show his details, but he overlooked the box showing his weight. The figure was clearly too low for a fully grown male, so I investigated further.
And what did you discover?
I wasn't suspicious at first, but I needed the correct figure, so I accessed some cross-referenced records linked to his, or rather to Mrs. Adams' identification number, hoping to find it. And some anomalies started cropping up. The hormone replacement therapy didn't seem to gel with what I knew of Mr. Merryfield, nor indeed did his hysterectomy, which, according to the dates, had been performed shortly before his 9th birthday.
And what did you do?
I contacted security and had him brought in for interview.
And what did he tell you?
He claimed at first that he had undergone a sex change operation along with extensive plastic surgery as part of a witness relocation program.
And you didn't believe him?
Well, he took a while to come up with the story, but I became aware that he was working bits of it out on a piece of paper under the desk. Also, the names he used were taken from objects in my office. I began to get wise to that after he told me that the surgeon who performed the sex change operation was a Dr. Holepunch.
Mm-hmm. Did he tell you about what he'd done to Mrs. Adams during that interview?
No, he stuck to the same story. I ordered him detained, and the security team played looped tapes of Muzak on a 24/7 basis until he broke and confessed.
Thank you. You've been very helpful. Defence, your witness.
You say that the security team played loop tapes of Muzak at the defendant. Could you define Muzak for the court?
Oh, certainly. Muzak is the rendering of a popular or classical song using inappropriate instruments. A key feature is having the vocal line replaced by synthesized panpipes or something equally offensive.
And who authorized the security team to play this to my client?
I did.
And do personnel departments often authorize the use of such measures?
All personnel officers are sometimes required to employ unorthodox and often aggressive methods to achieve the results that they need.
But sleep deprivation and sensory bombardment? That's not exactly textbook stuff, is it?
I assessed the situation and took the course of action I believed to be the correct one.
I see. You disregarded protocol, and you took the course of action you believed to be the correct one. Interesting. One final question. Why were you going through his record in the first place?
The editor of the colony newspaper wanted some background information on him.
Because?
They were doing an article about his part in averting the splitting of the pressure dome.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honour.
Thank you. You may go. Counsel for the prosecution, do you have another witness?
We do, Your Honour. We call Philip Merryfield. Mr. Merryfield, it is customary practice for us to swear witnesses in. However, I'm tempted in your case to simply skip that, as I doubt your ability to tell the truth under any circumstances.
Objection, Your Honour. Counsel for the prosecution is just being a jerk.
Objection sustained. Counsel will proceed in a more professional manner.
Apologies, Your Honour.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Merryfield, let's keep this simple. Were you picked to be a member of the colony?
No, I was not.
Did you physically remove Mrs. Adams from the ship?
Yes, I did.
You were aware that the cataclysm was imminent and that being left behind would be fatal to Mrs. Adams?
Yes, I was.
So, to sum up your testimony, no, you shouldn't be here, and yes, you left a little old lady to die on a doomed planet to save your own miserable skin.
I don't recall using the words miserable skin, but the basis is correct, yes.
In that case, Your Honour, I have no further questions. The defendant has freely admitted the charges against him. My work here is done.
Your Honour, the facts are not in dispute. What we are concerned with here today is the motivation behind the actions and whether or not they were justified.
Is my learned colleague suggesting, Your Honour, that there are circumstances under which throwing vulnerable people overboard is an acceptable pastime?
That remains to be seen. Your Honour, I'd like to take this opportunity to examine one of the prosecution's recurring points, the fact that Mrs. Adams was selected for this mission. My client is more than aware of that fact. He was actually one of the people who set the system up. Mr. Merryfield, can you describe in your own words how you became involved in the ARC project?
Yes, I can. It all started 2 years ago.
Come in. Ah, Mr. Merryfield, please take a seat. Glad you could come.
Not at all. The company that I represent is very keen to work with the public sector. To be frank with you, we're looking to do anything that will help our chances of tendering for the big national contract when it comes up for renewal.
Ah, an excellent and laudable plan, but a futile one, I fear. The contract isn't up for renewal for another 3 years, and by that time the Earth will have been destroyed. Tea?
What? You're kidding!
Oh, not a big fan of tea, I see.
No, I was reacting to your previous statement. The one about the Earth being destroyed.
Of course. Sandra, tea please, 2 cups. I must warn you that the news of the Earth's impending annihilation is on a strictly need-to-know basis. And some biscuits, please, Sandra.
What will cause it?
Oh, some sort of cataclysm, apparently. To be honest, I didn't read that far into the memo. My task, Mr. Merryfield, is to head up the government selection process of people for Project Mars Arc. I'm afraid I can't tell you any details about what that project is, so you'll have to bear with me.
Is it a huge spaceship designed to carry people to Mars to save a small seed of humanity from the destruction of our home world?
You got that from the name, didn't you? That's been happening a lot recently. Sandra, can you make a note to change the name of Project Mars Ark to something else? Sandra? Must have gone to lunch. Now, as I was saying, we want you to assist my department with the team selection.
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to choose the most able people.
If you'll pardon me, Mr. Merryfield, I'm going to stop you right there. We don't want you to select the best.
I'm sorry.
That would be discriminatory. Please remember that this project is government run. As such, it must comply with all the regulations laid down by Parliament. The rules must be observed during selection, and so we may not discriminate on the basis of, here we are, age, sex, ethnic origin, religion, sexual orientation, height, marital status, income demographic, weight, intelligence, shoe size, fears and phobias, social class, hobbies, and ability.
So how are we going to choose people?
Well, there is one factor that hasn't been targeted by the powers that be, and that is luck.
Luck?
Yes, Mr. Merryfield, luck. The lady, fortune. Give it whatever name you want. Some people have it and some don't. We are not going to send the best or the strongest to Mars, Mr. Merryfield. We are going to send the luckiest.
And this presumably is where I come in?
Precisely. Your company specializes in running lotteries and sweepstakes. We would like you to organize a lottery involving every man, woman, and child in the country without exception.
I see. I'll start work on it right away. The only thing is...
Yes?
We might need payment in advance of the project.
I will see what we can do. I'll get Sandra to show you out. Sandra? Blast, where is that girl?
Don't worry, I'll see myself out.
So, this grand selection process, which my learned colleague keeps on repeating like a broken parrot.
Objection, Your Honour. Mixed metaphor.
Sustained.
This selection process was little more than a lucky dip.
In essence, yes. Hence, the large range of characteristics in the colony's groupings, from intelligent and good-looking people, such as yourself, to ugly morons, such as the counsel for the prosecution.
Objection, Your Honour. I don't like where the defendant is going with this.
No, I'm going to allow it. Counsel will accept the fact that you are not pleasing to the eye. Proceed.
Having established the invalidity of the selection process, I have no further questions for the witness at this time, although we reserve the right to recall him at a later time.
Very well. The defendant is excused. Counsel for the prosecution, do you wish to call any further witnesses?
No, Your Honour. The defendant has admitted his guilt on all charges, and on that point, prosecution rests.
Counsel for the defence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Honour. As a first witness, the defence calls Sergeant Bartrain Aloysius.
Sergeant, please raise your hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Sergeant, aside from the security element of your role, you also have responsibilities in terms of constructing and maintaining the physical structure of the colony. Is that not so?
It is.
Could you explain a little of what that entails?
The plan explained to us back on Earth was that the ship would land and form the basis of the colony. We would then use spacesuits to build a pressure dome over the ship, allowing more room for accommodation and agriculture. In time, more domes would be added.
And is this what we've done?
Yes. Hence the massive dome over us. You may have seen it.
Did the defendant assist in the construction of the pressure dome?
Yes, he did.
Sergeant, would you indulge us with your recollection of the events of October 21st of this year?
I'd just finished my daily inspection and was writing up a report when I heard a commotion.
And what did you do?
I went to investigate and found the defendant pressed up against the inside of the dome wall. He shouted to me that he'd found a leak. I suited up and I went outside and found that he was correct.
So he had blocked the leak with his body?
Correct.
It's been very painful for him.
I'd imagine so.
The nurse who treated him reported severe lacerations and internal bruising.
It is what it is.
Quite. What would have happened, Sergeant, had he not done so?
An extreme case is the dome could have disintegrated. Most likely, we would simply have lost all our air.
I'm not a technical person, but I imagine that would be a bad thing.
It wouldn't be good news for the breathers amongst us, no.
Out of interest, what caused the hole?
Poor quality materials, probably due to the government's policy of buying from the lowest price vendor.
This is the same issue that led to the destruction of our sister ship shortly after takeoff?
Could have been.
You don't seem concerned about the loss of all those lives.
Everyone's got to go sometime. We got a better landing site because of it.
Objection, Your Honour. Wasting the court's time. This has no bearing on the case at hand. If the counsel is really so concerned about the supply of breathable air, perhaps he would be better off coming to the point sometime soon.
I'm not sure if my esteemed colleague came to court by horse today, but if so, my next remark concerns them both.
Order! Enough of this bickering. Prosecution. Shut it. Defense. Condense it.
My point, Your Honour, is simply this. Without Mr. Merryfield, we wouldn't have any oxygen left. We owe him our lives. It's unlikely that Mrs. Adams would have been able to detect the leak, much less do anything about it, as she would not have been part of the construction crew. Put simply, had Mr. Merryfield not replaced Mrs. Adams, we would all, each one of us, be dead right now. No more questions for this witness, Your Honour.
Sergeant, the law. You're obviously familiar with it. Can you tell us the exchange rate for a murder in terms of good deeds?
I'm sorry?
My learned friend has postulated the legal system works on a points basis. If I beat one old lady up and steal her wallet and then help another across the street, then the two cancel each other out, yes? In the eyes of the law, it's even Stevens all round, surely.
No, the law doesn't work like that. A crime stands independent of good deeds. It might benefit your karma, but it's no defence in legal terms.
Interesting. One last question. Who constructed the section of dome where the fault occurred?
The defendant was responsible for that section.
Objection, Your Honour. The defect was traced to poor materials. I resent my learned colleague's implication.
Objection sustained. The witness is excused. Do you have any other further witnesses?
Yes. I call the Honourable Wendy Grossman.
You're calling me as a defense witness?
Objection, Your Honour. I'm not sure that my learned colleague can actually do that.
I'm going to allow it, largely because I'm curious as to where the defense counsel is looking to take this. However, I must warn you that if the situation becomes inappropriate, I shall halt the proceedings forthwith.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Ooh, we'll take that gesture as a yes. Now, can I ask if you know the defendant?
I have seen him around, certainly. Obviously, during the crossing from Earth and the first couple of months here, everyone was confined to the ship, so you couldn't help but become acquainted.
Of course. You are you not, our nominated judge for the colony?
I am.
Before you were selected for the colony, what was your occupation?
I was a civil servant, in charge of library services for one of the home counties.
But you have legal training, I take it?
Yes, my degree was in law.
Which makes you an expert witness in terms of its interpretation, as I'm sure both my learned colleague and the jury would agree. Now, in the case of my client, he is being prosecuted for what crime?
For murder.
And how does the law define murder?
There are various definitions, but the one still commonly used today is the one created by Sir Edward Coke. When a person of sound memory and age of discretion unlawfully killeth any reasonable creature in rerum natura under the Queen's peace.
I see. Could you explain to the court what the section about the Queen's peace means?
That is basically there to exclude the killing of enemy soldiers and so forth during a state of wartime or civil emergency.
I understand. But my client didn't actually kill Mrs. Adams. All he did was to manhandle her out of the airlock door and onto the loading platform. She was still completely unharmed when he closed the hatch.
That may be true, but the law also states that it is murder if the person dies as a result of that action.
Which brings us to my next question. How do we know Mrs. Adams is dead?
I'm sorry?
Well, the definition of murder says that my client would have had to have unlawfully killed Mrs. Adams. If she isn't actually dead, the charge doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it?
She would have had to move pretty sharpish to get out of the blast area before the engines fired.
And you have doubts that she did?
Well, she was an old woman, and by all accounts not very mobile.
I see. But supposing that she had managed to get clear of the rocket blast, do we know that she would have perished since? The bunker at the launch site was well stocked with supplies, and there were personnel there who didn't have a seat on the ship. She would have had at least some protection against the cataclysm.
Nevertheless, she is stranded on a doomed world.
My question remains, is it usual to try someone for murder whilst the victim is still alive?
No, not to my knowledge. But we will never know what happened to her. No radio communication has been established since the cataclysm, not even with our base, which had an extensive communications array.
Very well. On a different note, you received the same baggage allowance as everyone when you were advised that you had been selected for the colony.
Yes, 5 kilos. Not a lot to save.
And what did you bring?
Photos and music mainly, and a couple of books.
Which books, out of interest?
I brought Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island. It tells the story of people cast away on a tiny spot in the Pacific building a new home for themselves. I thought it might come in useful.
I'm a Verne fan myself. I also loved Journey to the Center of the Earth. Did you ever own a copy of that?
I do. Well, I did.
Meaning it got left behind on Earth?
It did.
Didn't you think it was as good as A Mysterious Island?
No, I thought they were of equal value. I just thought The Mysterious Island would be more useful here.
I see. So things can be of equal value, but one can be more appropriate to a situation. Do you believe that the same value judgment can be applied to people?
Objection, Your Honour. You're speculating.
I am not. Objection overruled. I'd say no.
And why would you say no?
Because people are not objects.
But surely as a judge you would agree that there are occasions when decisions concerning people need to be made objectively.
Of course.
In the definition of murder, can you expand on the word unlawful? I assume there are situations then where it is lawful.
That is a reference to justifiable homicide.
And this, for example, protects yourself as a judge and those others who will be involved in the death of my client if he is found guilty.
That's one of the reasons, yes. The other is where an individual takes action to protect themselves against attack.
So, in a case where someone's life is at risk, that is an extenuating circumstance?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, one last point. If an aircraft is about to crash, and there are 2 people on board and only 1 parachute, is the person who gets the parachute charged with the murder of the one who doesn't? I'm going to need an answer on that one, I'm afraid.
I've never heard of a case where that happened, unless the person who survived was responsible for the crash in the first place.
And presumably you would not pin sole responsibility for the cataclysm that enveloped Earth on my client.
No.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honour. Prosecution. Your witness.
Your Honour, you have had training in law, as we have heard. Can you tell the court why we have a legal system?
That's an involved question, but essentially to protect the rights of citizens and the laws of the state.
The laws of the state are basically the distillation of what the people duly appointed to the task have considered to be in the public interest. Is that not so?
By and large, yes.
Where the good of an individual conflicts with the laws of the state, what happens?
The laws are so constructed that an individual acting in good conscience should never be in that position.
So, if a man commits a burglary and benefits from the proceeds, whilst that may be in his own interest, the law must still take precedence because his actions are not in the interest of all?
Correct.
In fact, it is one of the principal duties of the law to prevent precedents being set that could lead to a breakdown of civil obedience.
That would be a fair statement, yes.
And in an emergency situation, those laws are even more important, as the fabric must be kept strong for the good of all in order for them to survive. Hence, stricter sentencing and actions during times of martial law, such as soldiers being authorised to shoot rioters and looters during wartime, and indeed what we would term frontier law.
Yes.
And we would certainly agree that this, of all the periods recorded throughout history, would count as one of the direst emergency.
I think we can safely say that, yes.
Then I would contend that it is the duty of this court to ensure that a message is sent out to all, that action against the laws and dictates of the colony for the benefit of self-interest is simply intolerable. If we devolve into the mindset of might equals right, the whole basis of democracy and our future survival is placed in jeopardy. No further questions, Your Honour.
Defence counsel, do you have any further witness you wish to call?
No, Your Honour.
In that case, we will hear your closing statements. Counsel for the prosecution, if you please.
Ladies and gentlemen, you were called here to act as a jury. Instead, you have been an audience to the worst kind of farce, poorly conceived and poorly played out.
Oi, that's not fair.
Easy.
By which I mean, the case before you is one of the simplest ever put before a body to decide. The defendant freely admits to having forcibly replaced a legally appointed member of this colony, someone without the ability to defend themselves. We are in a state of emergency. This colony cannot and will not function with that sort of behaviour. Should food rationing be replaced with a free-for-all over a crate of supplies? Should we elect people to positions of responsibility based on their ability to body slam an opponent? If that is the case, we have brought the worst of our race with us, not the best. If you value your safety and that of your children, we must put a stop to this now. The security and the laws of the colony must come first. Any other path leads to anarchy and mutual destruction. The prosecution rests.
Thank you. Counsel for the defence.
I agree wholeheartedly with my learned colleague. The safety of the colony is of paramount importance. Any other attitude would be idiocy. But it is idiocy that has brought us to this pass. I will not deny that self-preservation played a part in my client's decision to do what he did. To do so would clearly be hypocrisy. But we have seen that the selection process for the colony was flawed in a most deplorable way. Bureaucracy stood over common sense. An elderly woman with limited mobility and no skills to contribute to life on another planet was selected over countless others more fitted to the task. My client had as valid a right to be on this ship as she did, and arguably better reason, and he chose to redress the mistake made in her selection. There was no malice involved in her death. But what we do know is that my client has since saved the life of every man, woman, and child here at the risk of his own life. That may be said to prove that his judgment in believing that he would be of more use here was justified. Not value, mark you, but use. Far from the paranoid warning of my colleagues that his survival should set fear of might equals right over us all, he is an example of someone who has worked hard and risked himself for the good of the colony and for our mutual survival. And in terms of examples, surely there can be no better one to set than that. Your Honour, the defence rests.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard both sides of a difficult argument. The decision which you make here tonight will have far-reaching consequences in the future in terms of precedents and in how we view individual authority and freedom of choice. The charge brought against the defendant is one of murder. If you feel that his actions at the launch were justified given the circumstances, and that with his ensuing conduct he has proven himself to be someone that we can trust as part of our community, you must find him not guilty. If, however, you believe that nothing can condone his actions, a guilty verdict must be given. The laws of our colony mean that a capital sentence is mandatory in such an event. The decision, ladies and gentlemen, rests with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please use the chat function to cast your vote. Please type either guilty or not guilty now. The chat box can be found at the bottom of your screen.
Attention! You now have 1 minute to place your votes. Seconds remaining. 20 seconds remaining. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Voting time ended.
Your Honour, the votes have been cast. The jury finds the defendant, Philip Merryfield, guilty on the charge of murder.
Very well. Philip David Merryfield, you have been found guilty by a jury of your fellow colonists of the willful murder of Mrs. Betty Adams on or about the 15th of January last year. The sentence of this court is that you be given a 2-hour allowance of air and be expelled from this colony onto the unprotected surface of this planet, there to make peace with your Maker. And may they have mercy on your soul.
You have been listening to The Trial of Philip Merryfield by Peter Cameron-Burnett. The cast were as follows: Andy Cox as Philip Merryfield, Wendy Grossman as the judge, Jenny Tickett as the prosecution, Peter Cameron-Burnett as the defence, Harriet Muir as the clerk of court, Kat Lamin as witness number 2, Paul Huggins as witness number 1, Tony Cotterill as Sergeant Aloysius, and the government official was played by John Coop. Sound was by Bob Gingell, and I, Malcolm McAllister, have been your announcer. This was a Zoom production by the QC Players and was directed by Mandy Gasson. Thank you for listening.